This week on Head to Head, the Trilogy Wars.
You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Mansell.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this podcast. Now, in the usual thing that we always do, where we talk about, certain things that are coming up or whatever. Mm-hmm. Have you heard that they're coming out with National Treasure 3?
Yeah, actually, I've heard about that, and there's a possibility for Bad Boys 4, too.
No way.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they've actually been talking about Bad Boys 4 and a National Treasure 3.
Now, I knew about National Treasure 3, obviously, because I brought it up, but right. I did not know that they were, well, I guess, Bad Boys 3, is it doing good in the box office? I still haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it is. Like I said in the last podcast, I think it's one of the better written stories from the Bad Boys franchise. It kind of harkened back a little bit towards the first Bad Boys, but even with a little bit more oomph to it. This kind of had like a bit of a mystery thing to it, so this was kind of cool.
Well, that's the thing, man. I mean, this is definitely like the time for sequels. Like, what are we getting Coming to America too? Like,
yeah, that's coming out pretty soon too. Eddie Murphy's back at it, and he's actually got majority of the cast coming back to do it. But
that movie is like really
like, I don't know how you're gonna.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like,
but it's him though. It's his thing,
and I think that's a movie that it's like if. I don't think that Eddie would mess it up. No. Like, he knows that's like gold. Like, you can't.
Definitely.
You can't mess that up.
Yeah. He knows that. And I think he's taking his time to actually truly, like, craft something that's really going to, get the fans, especially with him bringing everybody back.
Oh, I know. And that's the thing. Like, bringing the whole original cast back, basically. Yeah, it's like.
For those who are still alive.
Yeah.
And Mara St. Clair, unfortunately, won't be there. But of course, our favorite Sith Lord will be returning.
That's true.
So, can't go wrong with that.
Mm-mm. Well, I think it's time to leave the movie theater and go to the Cantina. What do you think?
Hey.
Ready for that drink?
Yes, sir.
All right. So what do you got first?
All right, man. So what worked for you in regards to the sequel trilogy? Like, it's overall. Like, so Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, all those movies are now done and over. Mm-hmm. So, overall for the sequel, what things worked for you?
What worked for me? Well, definitely the new characters worked for me. And to me, that was critical. Like, that was absolutely hypercritical because you knew that, okay, so even though as a fan, we all wanted Han, Luke, and Leia to, almost be like how it was, like I mentioned last week in the Timothy Zahn novels. They were still the primary characters. Yes, they introduced new characters along with them, but they were still the main heroes on which we focused. Disney decided not to go in that direction this time, so we got brand new characters. And I was disappointed because obviously growing up with Han, Luke, and Leia, I wanted to see the continuing adventures, especially because I personally invested a lot of time reading what is now the Legends, what was the expanded universe. Mm-hmm. So when, Disney was announcing like, oh yeah, we're going to make all these movies or whatever, I'm just like, oh yeah, man, we're going to get finally, like maybe we'll get movie versions of a lot of these great books that are out.
Right.
And admittedly, there's a lot of silly stuff that went on in the EU and it wasn't all sunshine and roses like a lot of people paint out. I mean, there's a lot of really bad books and bad writing, bad stories. But there was also, like, absolute gold in that. True. And, even Lucas himself, like, kind of...
Mined a little bit.
Yeah, he mined a little bit of that for the prequels. So, I mean, that was cool. But in the sequels, when they made the announcement that they were going to do what they were doing, they absolutely had to get new characters that were compelling and that were good. Do I think that they're as compelling as Han, Luke, and Leia? No, but we also haven't had like 40 years to sit with these guys either. Mm-hmm. But I did find myself drawn to them, wondering about backstory, things like that. So I'm a fan. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I thought that worked was the visuals, the music, the comedy, except for The Last Jedi. I felt it was it wasn't Star Wars comedy. It was more like Marvel humor.
Gotcha.
But, if you're looking at the sequel trilogy overall.
Right.
Because The Rise of Skywalker more than makes up for that, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. What else? The villains.
Okay.
I guess that goes in with the characters, but like Kylo Ren's one of my favorite Star Wars villains. It's not the most popular thing to say either, because there's a lot of people that really didn't like him. But I thought that he represented a really cool, unique, different villain. And I thought that he was definitely the standout in the sequel trilogy. Oh, what else? There's actually a lot of things that work for me.
Okay. I think for me, things that work. Definitely the visuals. I
know you love that whole like TIE fighter.
Oh yeah, still.
I'm not talking about the Rogue One either. I'm talking about the one where
no, the Force Awakens one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with the sun behind it. Yeah, that was still like one of my favorite shots. But visually, yes, I thought it was very well done. I think that the characters that we got to see, of course. Finn, Poe, and Rey. I think they all brought something unique to it. I think the only difference, well, I'll get into that a little bit later. But let's see. I like the fact that they kind of had their own path, their own journey that they kind of had to come into. So that was cool. I like the planets. I think those were cool. Some of the planets were really cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I actually thought that
the overall look of it, like, okay, if we're going to take stormtroopers again, but they reimagined the Force, like,
right. That was another good one too. Yeah, the reimagining and the updating of different things, like the new version of the Star Destroyers, the new version of Stormtroopers.
Yeah, even Starkiller Bases, although that was supposed to be like,
and that's what I was about to say. Is that I actually kind of thought Starkiller Base was a cool idea. I mean, it was a little maybe impractical, but I mean, overall, I thought that it was at least we weren't getting a third Death Star. Yeah,
I love the feels of the of the original members coming back, of seeing them again, and in those roles. It's kind of like there was something comforting about that. Like, okay, they're still here, even though they're not truly the focus of it. They're still here.
And the thing that I liked about it, like, I think what really worked for me was Han Solo's return. Yeah. And the fact that his whole little adventure in The Force Awakens, I thought was just spot on. Yeah, I mean, just the way it seemed like effortlessly he slipped back into that role. Like, even the stuff that he would say, like his comedy, that's what I really miss. I miss, like, his little sarcastic or crass, remarks, stuff exactly. Like, that's not how the Force, or, yes, I do all the time. Just him being Han is just hilarious. Yeah, it was great to see Han Solo again, and just to even hear people like say his name, and it's just like, oh, it's like, yeah. But I mean, the thing that was really cool too that I thought was seeing his growth, and also seeing the fact that, when he gave the whole speech about how the Force and all this stuff was real, and I mean, it was kind of cool because, here's this guy who thought that it was just a bunch of crap, but then he's like, I've seen too much now. It's like he knows, like, no, this is all. Right, it's all true. And to hear him talk about Vader, and to hear him, I mean, there was just a lot of really cool things to hear him talk about, because number one, he never really heard Han Solo talk about a lot of that. No. The second thing was, you never really thought that you would ever hear Harrison Ford utter things like Jedi and Vader and all that stuff again. Well, yeah. Because he was just so grumpy about Star Wars, and just to hear this stuff coming out of his mouth, it's like, oh, this is so cool. Well, yeah, not only that, just like hearing him, that one line that I just said, that's not how the Force works. Oh, that was brilliant. I mean, that was just so perfect, because it's like you said, like, he didn't believe it, and now he's like the authority on it. Like, that's not how it works. Like, like, we'll use the Force. That's not how it works. It's like, that's not how the Force works. Yeah, exactly. Like, all of a sudden he, Yeah, it's the authority of it all. Like, oh, like, you're a Jedi now. But it's almost like one of the greatest things in that whole Family Guy thing. Oh. Where it's like, well, you don't believe in the Force, do you? And, it's like, oh, you mean that thing you just learned about like 5 minutes ago? Yeah, that was awesome. So, yeah, I think the comedy in it, of course, was spot on. There's just a lot of great moments.
I love the lessons that were taught too. You know, those are
the Yoda lesson.
The Yoda lesson
primarily was my favorite.
Yes, that was my favorite. And just even seeing him return and it's just. But I love the different directions the different risks that they took. I love the new force powers and abilities that they showed.
That's another one. That's a good point, actually. A lot of the force powers I thought were unique, and they actually, I didn't think that they were so far-fetched. You know, a lot of times when people say, oh, you know, it's getting crazy or whatever, I'm like, you never really read the EU, did you? I mean,
all right.
And a lot of this stuff, quite frankly, like Force Heal, I mean, it's been around for a while. It just hasn't been in the movies. And I think that people that only watch the movies are like thinking this is new, where any of us hardcores that have, you know, read a lot of the comics and the books and all this other stuff are like, what are you talking about? This has been around since like the 90s.
Or just even the regular stuff, but just like amplify. So like, okay, we've seen Vader, you know, block bolts with his hand, but like when Kylo actually froze one in midair and then walked off, it's still there until he leaves. I mean, that was just impressive. You know, stuff like that.
Most impressive.
Or the whole mind thing that was, you know, extraction.
That whole, you know, right.
Piece.
Force Skype.
Right. Exactly.
And the way they carried it out, I mean, I know there was some criticism, but even in The Rise of Skywalker, where it was like they're almost like handing off stuff to each other and stuff through it, it's kind of like they learned to master it a little bit. And I thought that was unique.
Even unique new character. I mean, I know all these people are new because of but like Hux, for example, like the supportive character. I think that's what I wanted to go with it. Like the support characters were cool, like BB-8, Hux. Who's the other? That kind of even Rose was kind of funny. You know, just like
I mean, I thought that these were because they're also unique characters too. You know, you have like basically like an engineer.
Yeah,
you know,
but the fact that she kept like stunning everybody because like you know they kept trying to leave and just
that was funny. You know, even in The Rise of Skywalker, Zori Bliss, I thought she was like incredible. I mean, I would actually read comics based on her.
Yeah,
you know, so I mean that was overall. I thought that was good. I was really happy to see that in The Rise of Skywalker, them really giving 3PO the center stage because
he got his due.
I'll get into more of it later, but I was really happy to see that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that was really awesome. I think I kind of like the fact that they played with who they were going to show as far as from the original. So like the first movie was Han, then you got Han and Leia at the same time, sort of, you know, but we didn't get Luke. Like I like that, but I kind of didn't. Like I like the fact that we kind of got the chance to digest just them on their own almost.
Right, because it gives them a little bit more screen time.
Right, but then I hate the fact that we didn't get them all together, you know.
Yeah, so. I mean, I feel that was a lost opportunity, but I will say this, that it was made more tragic, I think, because of Carrie Fisher's untimely death. However, I do remember that they were saying, and they carried it out for the most part, even with the death, is that you know, Force Awakens was the Han-centric movie, and Last Jedi was the Luke-centric, and then, of course, the Leia-centric movie would have been more so, you know, but I mean, they did the best they could with that, and I did appreciate the fact that they tried to give each of the old characters sort of their own movie to be the one guiding the new characters through.
To kind of grow it,
Yeah. And I thought that was a really interesting approach, and that's something that I don't think people really talk about that much.
Yeah.
You know, but yet I thought that was a really brilliant move on their part.
Definitely. All right.
Well, we talked about what worked.
Now, what didn't work?
What didn't work? Well, I'll start with like one of the last things I was talking about, where I loved the way they handled 3PO in Rise of Skywalker. I thought he was really wasted and just underused in 7 and 8. I mean, you got him in like one scene in Force Awakens. He has this red arm that
we still don't know.
Well, we do. Well, but you have to, once again, you have to read a comic to find it out, though.
Yeah.
And then then you see him, and he does have more of a role in The Last Jedi, but it's like, it's weird. He just runs around screaming about, people committing some sort of mutiny or something, and just, and he'll have a few lines, and he doesn't really do anything. It was almost kind of like how he was sort of wasted in the prequels too, really.
Yeah.
But at least in the prequels, there was like a defined role. You knew he was kind of like Padme's protocol droid, and he was sort of with her, and
yeah, he's kind of Alfred, basically.
Yeah, and I mean, he did have some cool action scenes and stuff like that in Attack of the Clones,
right?
So he got a chance to go out and have an adventure when a battle droid head was.
Well, he actually swapped heads with the battle droid. Yeah.
I mean, that was cool. So I mean, there were some things like that, but I mean, for the most part, in the sequel trilogy, though, he was a little wasted. Like I said last week, I mean, I think that while I loved the idea of Palpatine returning, I thought the way they handled it, where they just made this announcement and everybody's like, oh, okay. Like, of course he is. I mean, I don't think that they handled that right. I think, as much as I hate to say this, I think there was a little too much fan service at times. Mm-hmm. Primarily in 7 and 9. Not so much in 8, obviously, but just a little. Like, it was almost like trying to be a love letter to the fans. And that was great, but I think that it could have been handled a little bit better, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I can definitely agree to that.
And, there's a lot of things that, didn't work for a lot of people, like the fact that they thought that Rey was overpowered and all that. I didn't necessarily get that. I mean, I think the greatest example that you can have of that is when she's using the Force to, basically like convince the stormtrooper to let her go. I could see where maybe that was a little...
Yeah, like, where did you get that from?
Exactly. Like, how'd you even know to do that?
Exactly.
And the other stuff, because we had talked about this before, where like, well, her combat skills, she fights with a staff. So, I mean, in melee combat, I mean, it makes sense that she would, essentially be okay with that. I mean, you just give her a lightsaber, it's kind of the same thing. Mm-hmm. And certain other things, especially when you find out she's a Palpatine, it's like, well, oh, okay, fine. But, which brings me into something else that didn't really work, and I think this is probably a big one on your list. They didn't plan this trilogy.
Oh, yes, that's going to be new.
Let's address the bantha in the room.
It's about that size.
I mean, I think that honestly, that's the trunk to these other branches we're talking about, because
true.
I don't think a lot of these other issues that we would have had with the trilogy exist without addressing the fact that this whole thing just seemed to have this choose your own adventure thing. It's kind of like, okay, here's 7. Now you go do what you want with 8. Okay, now you pick it up from there and you go do what you want with 9. And it's...
Yeah.
What they needed to do is they needed to sit the 3 directors in a room and everybody flesh out a story that Kathleen Kennedy was good with. And it's like, okay, you're directing 7, so here's where you have to start. You kind of have to go around here in the middle, and here's where you have to end. Mm-hmm. You can do anything you want in between there, but this is where we have to get to by the end of this movie. Same thing with 8. Okay, you pick it up. You can do anything you want, but you have to end up here. Mm-hmm. And then same thing with 9. And I think that would have really changed a lot of people's minds about the whole trilogy. And for things that didn't work, we're talking about all these nitpicky little things that didn't work, but let's be honest, there's probably a singular reason why a lot of these things didn't work. Like, I'll throw out another one. Canto Bight. Whole scene didn't work. Mm-hmm. Maz Kanata was shoehorned in. I thought that she was perfect for 9. I mean, she was there. She kind of was like, sort of like narrating, explain a few little, key scenes. It felt more natural for her to be there. But the whole thing in
8.
Yeah, in 8 just felt like they just shoehorned her in there.
Yeah.
Like I almost felt that Lando could have filled that role. You know, the fact that it's like, you know, they're going off for this, you know, this slicer basically. And it's kind of like the guy that they want, they don't even meet. They end up in jail on what's essentially a parking violation, which I thought was stupid.
Hey.
Then they ended up meeting the character that you love so much.
Ugh. Jesus Christ.
Which I think we can tick off on the list of things that didn't work for you.
Thank you.
And he just so happens to be this guy that can
go through anything.
That can do it.
Yeah.
You know, even though he wasn't even the one they were originally there to see. So, I mean, there was just so many issues with that whole sequence that I think that you could just write that whole sequence off as, okay, this just didn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they just didn't have it. For me, man, like you said, it starts with numero uno, El Capitan, King, Emperor of them all, no planning. You know, that's the biggest thing. Followed by wasted characters, like creating or giving us characters like Phasma, like the Knights of Ren.
Yeah, that's
and
a
they
big
still
one.
didn't like. Even we see the Knights of Ren more, but they still don't do anything.
Well, here's the thing I never understood about that whole thing. Now that we're talking about that, the Knights of Ren are like sworn to follow Kylo, right?
Right.
So why on earth did they go and attack him at the end? Just because he has a blue lightsaber? I mean, it's like Kylo should have just been like, all right, boys, we're going to do this. And they'd be like, all right, whatever.
No, that's what I'm saying.
They didn't even talk to him. They just instantly were going to like, no.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's just...
That's the leader. That'd be like stormtroopers just for no reason trying to pull guns on Vader or something. It's like, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I just think that...
That's not how the knights work.
It's just...
It's stupid little things like that.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. The Knights of Ren... When we do finally see them, I mean, they're essentially private detectives. All they do is follow people. And then they go to attack their leader for no reason whatsoever. I mean, the only thing that I could say that maybe you could defend it is maybe Palpatine gave them some sort of order and he supersedes Kylo. I don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, like, I think Knights of Ren, Phasma was criminally underused. And
let's throw the Sith troopers in there.
Sith troopers,
they were heavily, once again, another Phasma-like thing. They were heavily marketed.
Yep.
I mean, did we even see them do anything? I mean, they stood on the Star Destroyer, I think.
Yeah,
but,
and just shot. You know, they're almost like regular stormtroopers. They just painted themselves red or something.
Yeah.
You know, so that's what I'm saying. Like, there was no, you know, rhyme or reason for these characters to even be in the thing. Even aside from the fact that they just needed some supplies or whatever, but they almost kind of tried to build, not Zori Bliss, but the other one.
Oh, Janna?
Yes, Janna. Like, okay, well, what was her? I mean, she really didn't have much of a thing for me either.
And that's the thing.
It's like
of the two new characters, obviously Zori Bliss, I like the best.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I will say, Janna didn't really work for me overall. I'll be honest. But here's the thing, and this is why I could have put her also in a category of things that did work for me. So let me just back up for a second. What did work for me was I really loved the fact that they gave her the same backstory as Finn, that Finn finds out, oh no, there were other stormtroopers
that defected
and, you know, that went through the same thing you did. And it kind of made him feel like, hey, I'm not the only one here.
Yeah.
There's like a whole community of me, which gives him purpose. And I thought that was a really brilliant move on their part.
Yeah.
On the other hand, she ended up just being like the cliched, you know, warrior woman that you meet.
Yeah, it's like Xena.
Or some of these other ones that end up being... Because here's what's so funny. Now, on the Mandalorian side, the Cara Dune character, that works.
But see, that makes more sense. But see, her being a former trooper, though, it's like, okay, like, yeah, you can see why. Like, she kicks butt. But, like, Janna, it's like, you're riding on a horse. It's very Aborigine. Like, you know, it's just kind of like, okay, well, I don't believe it. I don't believe that she was a stormtrooper. I don't believe that. Cara Dune, yes, I believe that she was once a stormtrooper because of how she carries herself, how she conducts herself, how she talks. But like her, it's just kind of like, it's like Pocahontas or something in Star Wars. It was weird.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I thought it was a visual cool thing, the horses on the Star Destroyer were a little... Like, I could hang with them at first because it made sense the way that they described it. But then, you know, when stuff was starting to blow up and all this, it's like, well, how are you still even on this ship? It didn't quite take me out of it, but I felt the whole action sequence was put in there because there was somebody that probably was smoking some really good dope that said, do you know what would be awesome? We should have like horses riding on a Star Destroyer.
Well, I mean, I think it was just one of those things of the sign of our time, unfortunately, and that's let's just do something different for the sake of doing something different and not really truly having a point to it.
If I might pause here for just a second, to the gentleman on YouTube that had commented at one point, hopefully, I don't know if you're still watching our show or whatever, but for any of you guys who didn't know, you can check on one of the comments on YouTube. He was cool, don't get me wrong, but he just felt that we were looking through, the whole Star Wars thing through nostalgia, and that's why we liked. I don't remember if it was a non-spoiler or spoiler review, but it was a comment on that. He was like, well, you guys are just... Can you plainly see that we're not looking at this through nostalgia? I mean... we're doing a whole segment on what didn't work here.
Yep.
So I just want to point out to you guys, for everybody that thinks that there are two generations that are being represented here, granted they're the older ones, they're not the brand new ones. Exactly. They still check out. And, we do understand that there are things. I mean, this is another thing that I hate. And this can go into what doesn't work for me. The fandom doesn't work for me.
I knew you was going to go there.
Yeah, because here's the thing that's funny, and I could say this. I don't want to be the old man saying, get off my lawn here. But at the same time, I have to say that it's like, it's one thing not to like something. It's one thing if you don't agree. But I mean, to sit there and start accusing people and really like blasting them if they like something.
Yeah.
Because something works. Now, granted, the guy that, commented, I'm not talking about him because, he was cool. He was respectful. He was just like, look, I mean, I think that you guys are looking at this a little nostalgic, but we're not.
No. I think that, like, one of the biggest things about, like I said, to continue with the whole things I don't like about the sequel is that, like, even too much, like we always said, too much fan service. I think it was too much. Yeah. And especially in Rise of Skywalker.
Especially Rise of Skywalker.
I like the little nods and stuff like they did where, like in 8, when we saw the X-Wing underwater, it's like, okay, well, how did he get to okay, he still has his X-Wing, That
gave me chills, actually.
Yeah, and it was like...
When they showed the X-Wing there, and it was like Luke's X-Wing, I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah, but it's like buried under water. It's like, why didn't he park it, like... on land somewhere? Like,
no, it must not have a rust problem because
man. So I'm just like, all right, but the whole characters, like, although I love them, I think they were great. I just felt like they all were too young. Like, it felt like a little bit high schooly to me.
Yeah.
Because like when you look at
exactly what you're talking about.
I'm saying? It's almost like if you look at the vibe of...
Except for Poe. Poe was kind of like the Han Solo. I mean, the thing that I will say, though, and this goes to your point, is the fact that, Han Solo basically had not the exact same story arc, but a similar thing where he had to learn how to be a leader, kind of. Mm-hmm. He still had a maturity about him, though. That Poe seems to be like, it's like, dude, you're like 30-something. You shouldn't... You shouldn't have to learn these lessons. Yeah. He's acting like he's like 22.
Exactly.
Almost like in Top Gun. You can understand why Maverick has to learn,
because he's young and talented.
He's young and he's talented and he just doesn't know how to handle that. He can't resolve that in his head. But it's like Poe, if they wanted Poe to be like that, they should have cast somebody that was, a lot younger for that role. Poe should know better. He shouldn't have to be taught how to be... I mean, you could, I guess, make the argument that, okay, it's like if you're used to doing this all the time and you're really set in your ways. But I don't know. I think it speaks to your
it's just
whole, like everybody either was too young or acted too young.
Yeah, like even Leia, though, because the cool thing about Leia is the fact that, like, Leia was young. She was a young princess or a young senator or whatever you want to call her. But, like, because of what she had to do, it matured her to the point where she's like taking command and she's like, no, this is what we're going to do. Out of the way, flyboy. You know, like, look, I don't have time for this. Like she had a serious, and then even her diplomat, like, how she even talked to Tarkin.
I know.
I mean, like this guy's like this whole military general.
And these people are all like teenagers, basically.
Yeah.
That Robot Chicken, man. It's like, okay, we had the Death Star blown up by a bunch of teenagers.
Yep.
Whatever. But I mean, it's true. You know, she was a teenager. She was supposed to be like 19 or 20.
Yeah.
Luke was supposed to be around that age. You know, they still acted older.
Yeah, and I think
even if you go back to the prequels, like Padme.
Yeah, Padme still the same way. But I felt like this group was a little bit more like
you're at Bayside High.
Yeah, I felt like I was, with a bunch of my kids that I teach every day. It's like, this is weird. And even with Kylo, because you're so used to like, okay, Hux is still relatively young. Kylo is young, and then like you basically have all these young people running this thing, as opposed to like Vader is Vader. Like Vader is a grown man like that is really running this ship. He's got all these other admirals that are like 60 something years old. It had a certain maturity level to it. Although it still had the comedy and humor, it was still seasoned, if you will, whereas this group didn't kind of have that. It was kind of like, all right, and I don't know if that was intentional. Like maybe that was the marketing for a younger generation for that reason. I'm not sure.
But I mean, I was like 7 years old when I saw the original Star Wars. Like you said, everybody was like 30, 40 years old. Even the 19 or 20 year olds are talking like they're 80. I mean,
but that was a different time too, and I think everybody was kind of like,
well, plus it was a brand new. I mean, look, we weren't really coming out of the theater going, well, they acted a little bit. I mean, we were just like mesmerized by what we saw on the screen, and it was a different time. Now, even though Star Wars still maintains a level above the special effects of other movies, it's not as groundbreaking as it was. Now Star Wars is just doing it better, but it's not doing it differently.
Yeah. And then finally, I would just say like execution of some things. Like I think the execution of a lot of different things just didn't work for me in Star Wars. The whole believability in some people or some of the actions that certain people took. Leia, Mary Poppins back into the whole thing. That was just... Oh, yeah.
That was a classic.
Yeah, that.
Well, I'll tell you another thing that I wish they had done a little bit in 9 is I wish we could have, in The Force Awakens, we saw like Hosnian Prime and like 4 other planets get blown up.
And no one talked about it.
Yeah. The whole New Republic, as they knew it, the whole government's gone. And they never really address it. Mm-hmm. And in The Rise of Skywalker, it's like in The Last Jedi, it was believable because it almost had this Battlestar Galactica. These are like the last remnants of this system of government, even though they were technically resisting, because it was like they believed a little bit differently than the government. So they operated
outside of it.
Yeah, a little bit outside of it, but at the same time, when it came time for The Rise of Skywalker, now they suddenly got all these people, and it's like, what's going on with the government? Is there another New Republic? What's happening?
Yeah.
I wish they had, gone a little bit more into that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could go on and on. But...
We could. But what about you guys? What do you think? What actually worked for you with the sequel trilogy? What didn't work for you with the sequel trilogy? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're watching the video and looking everything up, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you guys can see when we come up with all kinds of different videos. So we are going to do a lot of more different stuff, guys. All right, what do we got next?
All right, so who do you think should spearhead the franchise moving forward? Because we have Kathleen Kennedy right now. She's the head.
Yep. She's right there.
So she's flashing us. But like, who do you think really because there's talks of her stepping down. Mm-hmm. So if she were to step down, well, first of all, do you believe she should?
Well, yes. I'd like to see her stay on as producer, though.
Okay.
The problem with Kathleen Kennedy is the fact that she's just not acting like a studio head. She's acting like a producer. She's an amazing producer, one of the best in the business, but she's not. On the other hand, you can't really say anything because all the movies that have been released under her whole thing have averaged $1 billion.
True.
So, I mean, you can't really say, well, you're messing up. On the other hand, you basically had this fragmented fan base. So I think it comes down to, if I had to choose the next person to spearhead, it would come down to one of two people. Kevin Feige would be one. And it's because of his success with Marvel, yes. But more importantly, he knows how to deal with a franchise. And he's a fan of the franchise. And I think that a lot of people mistakenly think that he would try to Marvelize Star Wars.
Right.
I don't think that would be the case. I think he understands the difference between Marvel and Star Wars. And I think that because he's a good studio head, he knows how to make those decisions and think like a studio head. He, I think, would probably be the best choice. If I had to go with a second choice, honestly, it would probably be, you would think I would say somebody like Hidalgo or, Filoni or somebody like that. I'd actually go with Favreau. Now, he's not really somebody he's more like a director kind of a guy, but I mean, I think that he really gets Star Wars. I think that you need somebody like that. Because if you think about it, Lucas was a filmmaker. Lucas wasn't some business guy.
Right.
He was a filmmaker. He was an independent filmmaker with a passion, and he started this company around his own filmmaking. He wasn't some experienced studio head. And Star Wars basically gave birth to his entire company. His whole company was formed around it. I mean, he created Industrial Light and Magic because there was no other effects house that could do what he needed them to do. So it's not like, the creator of the company in the first place was like some sort of a business guy at all. He was like a filmmaker that he had a vision and he wanted to see it through, and he knew he had to run the company to do it. So I think you could do that with Favreau, because Favreau understands storytelling. He understands Star Wars, and I think that he could probably run it. I would probably give it to Feige over Favreau. But I'm just saying that if you had to give it to somebody,
right?
And then of course I'm sure there's, because there's people. I mean, let's face it. There's a lot of people in the business that might be qualified to do it that I might not even know. Somebody might leave in the comments section. Hint, hint. Hey, you're not thinking about this guy. And you know what? You're probably right, because I don't sit around, reading about studio heads and
all the movie buffs and all the people who are really into the industry.
It'd be more like film guys that would, that are really familiar with all these directors and all this other stuff. They would be the ones that would understand and know all this. But if I'm sticking within the family and I'm looking at the success, because I really do think that it's important that, whoever runs this now really has to understand three things. Yes, they have to understand business, but I think more importantly, they have to understand storytelling, and they have to understand Star Wars. You can't just bring in a number cruncher to deal with this franchise. This franchise is not like any other franchise that's out there. And you have to be sensitive to that. It's kind of like you pointed out, a couple of weeks ago or something, where it's kind of like you can't just get any good director to do Star Wars. You have to get a really specific kind of person to do it.
True. Yeah.
Because a lot of times people, like even back in the day, right? Irvin Kershner, he directed like what's considered to be the best Star Wars movie of all time. I'd be willing to bet he would have been on nobody's list to direct Star Wars back then.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think
or get Spielberg.
I was about to say, like, that's the only person. Like, I would say either Spielberg or Feige. Like that to me, to just move, because one, George trusts him, and his reputation, of course, far exceeds most people's.
Well, I mean, when you talk about Spielberg,
yeah, I mean,
well, now you've got a guy who's like a genius director. He's run a studio because he had a similar thing, So I mean, he'd be like that guy, and of course he understands Star Wars because he's actually like punched up scripts and rewrote action scenes and he's done some stuff behind the scenes. Yeah,
he's done some major tweaks. And that's what I was going to say. Like Spielberg or Feige would be my two to lead Lucasfilm going into the future, just because I think you just have to have vision. I think you really have to understand vision and how are we going to get there. And it all starts with that plan. And you need someone who really understands that concept and all the minutia that goes with it. Mm-hmm. And so Kevin Feige has proven that with the Marvel Universe. And then, of course, Spielberg himself is just like, he's like almost like the John Williams, almost a film in a way.
Absolutely.
So the guy can pretty much almost walk into any property and kind of just do his thing.
Now, see, in a future episode, we're going to have to debate who should take over the music of Star Wars.
Ooh. I'm not ready for that. But yeah, we will.
No, we're not. But that's just food for thought, no pun intended, as I believe we're about to leave the cantina, aren't we?
Yes.
All right, well, finish up. So what about you guys? Who do you think should be the next person to, like spearhead the whole Star Wars franchise? Do you agree with Daryl that it should be Spielberg or Feige? Do you agree with me? Although I'm actually, Spielberg was somebody that just popped in my head later on. I mean, I would actually go with one of those three: Spielberg, Feige, or Favreau. Or do you guys have another, suggestion? Like any of you film snobs out there, you might want to, like, I'm sure there's somebody out there right now going, like, these guys are so clueless. Like, they have no idea. Like, there's like about 6 people that they can mention. And I'm sure if we read the list, we'd be like, oh, yeah, okay, that's not bad. But if you guys, by all means, we want to talk about this with you guys. So let us know in the comments section. And, hey, while you're there, subscribe to our channel. All right.
All right. So next we have Duel of the Fates. This week's Duel of the Fates is who will be the better person to lead the writing for the future movies? Pablo Hidalgo or Dave Filoni?
That's a good question.
Yeah, this one was a tough one. Even when I wrote this out, I was like, I don't even really know how I'm going to answer this one.
Hidalgo or Filoni? I don't know.
I'm going to go with Filoni.
Really?
I'm going to pick. I'm going to go with my cowboy. And you would never hear me say that in any other instance because I don't like the Dallas Cowboys. But I'll go with Filoni on this one simply because I think that he's the protege to Lucas and he's pretty much been there with him the whole time. I think that with the things that he's done in the animation, he's a great storyteller. He understands and he can kind of really dig into the minutia of, crafting out these characters about people we know and people we don't, such as Ahsoka Tano and her evolution. Like she really truly evolved, after, at the hand of Dave Filoni because she was kind of created, in that sense. And I think because he's worked so close with George Lucas that, he really understands George's vision. I think that's kind of like where you have to be. You kind of have to be in that headspace because that's kind of why we fell in love with Star Wars in the first place.
And that I definitely agree. And that's why it's such a hard choice.
Right.
And I mean, if we're being honest, ultimately I would probably have to agree with you and say Filoni because of all the points you made. He was a protege of George Lucas. Lucas, basically, taught him a lot of stuff, not just all the Star Wars lore, but actually tried to bring him up to be a mini Lucas.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he's had, he's been a showrunner on Rebels. Now he's directed a couple of live action things.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, as far as the stories go, it's tough because Pablo's like the keeper of the vault, basically. Like,
yeah,
he's the guy that everybody goes to.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's the guy that you go to for like canon and,
But I see what you're saying, though. It's kind of like a situation where,
and that's why I said
he's kind of like I mean, because, well, so we're talking about strictly writing the movies?
Yeah, that's what I said, the writing for the future of future movies, because I believe that, like, Pablo to me is more like, okay, he's kind of like a historian almost. He has,
yeah, exactly.
He kind of has he's almost like has all the holocrons, if you will. He has all the literature and everything that he can kind of sift through.
He's not really a scriptwriter or anything like that. I mean, the way that I would take this particular topic, and I mean, of course, you came up with it, so, but it's almost like who should choose. It's not even so much who should write it, but it's like who should choose topically what they cover in the future films. Like, do they do an Old Republic movie? Do they do this High Republic movie that's been rumored? Do they do a Yuuzhan Vong thing? Do they remake Timothy Zahn's 7, 8, and 9, but make it 10, 11, and 12 and use, Ray, Finn, and Poe and all them? It's kind of like who should make the choice about what topics they cover or what the next batch of movies is about.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that, ultimately. Okay. Because, Filoni, it's a no-brainer. I mean, he's the guy that Lucas trained. He's the guy that, Now, is there any argument that you can make for Pablo?
I would say that Pablo, because of his extensive knowledge, I think he could probably... he probably will be thinking of things that most people wouldn't, because he has the resources for that. So it's like there's stories or there's things that because he knows what can be done, what can't be done as far as canon and lore and things of that nature. You can kind of like, okay, in a way you can kind of surmise that he can come up with stories that would be of great interest predicated upon the information that he already has, because he has almost like all the puzzle pieces in a way. Whereas like Filoni is more like, I understand how the puzzle comes together, if that makes sense. Like, I understand how the pieces fit because I've been around the guy who designs the pieces, Right.
And that's ultimately what I think too. And I mean, honestly, I think it should be a group effort. I think that it doesn't seem to me, like, I don't know about you, but it doesn't seem to me like they really consult the story group about too many I mean, maybe if there's like continuity or contradictions or something in canon, but it doesn't seem like they're really consulting them about anything. And
that's where, I think that's what it really comes down to. I think it really comes down to people, like, when you're writing a Star Wars thing, I think the only people who need to be in there are like the director, the writers, and like, I think, but the two main people in there needs to be Pablo and Filoni, because I think their perspective of it is
they're kind of like the gatekeepers.
And what's going to make sense to Filoni has won the fans over time and time again. So his track record has been impeccable. So I think that when you have that type of stamp, and then you have the historian, those two locked together, now it's like, okay, look, writers, let's make this make sense. And then now you as a director, hey, now you taking what we've created basically for you and just execute it. We just need to know that you can execute this well. Yeah. You can get what we need out of the actors and actresses. And I think sometimes that's part of the problem, is when you have the director trying to direct and write the story, if they can just focus on the directing or the direction of getting the best performances out of, because then you can pay attention to the pacing. You can pay attention to that instead of, oh, we need to rewrite that, or we need to do this, or we just, it's like, if you can just focus on the flow, and if you can focus on the flow of it, of the show, or getting the best out of your actors, actresses, you'll be fine.
Yeah. No, I would agree. It's not going to be too much of a duel of the fates.
Yeah, not this
What
week.
about you guys? Do you think that Filoni, with the fact that he's more the creative and everything else, should he be the one that's creating all the stories and everything for the future movies? Or do you think Pablo, who's arguably the keeper of the entire vault and the historian of everything, should he be the one? Or maybe it should be both. Yeah. That was another thing we didn't really... we did sort of say that a little bit, but there is an argument to be made that the entire story group should be working with the creative team. And I think the studio had too. Like Kathleen, look, I know I don't have any illusions that these people are going to read every novel and every book. And, as a studio head, that's not your job anyway.
True.
But you should involve the story group. You should map a direction. It's not even just a direction for a trilogy of movies or even an entire saga. You got to really, if you want to keep Star Wars going, you have to plot out years and years ahead. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have every little
nuance.
Nuance and down to the minutia or whatever, but you at least have to go, you know what? This is the direction we're going in. Yeah,
conceptually,
yeah. And, at least some number of years out, go, okay, for a while we're going to concentrate on this era, then we're going to do this, and then, this novel will be coming out. Maybe we can address that in a movie, or you have, say, a comic series come out, and maybe you continue in the movies, or you tie something up in the movies. Those are the kinds of things that I honestly don't think that they're really thinking about. And this is something that I think Marvel does correctly. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, what are they on, phase 4 now or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're, you would have a bunch of the standalone films, and then of course they would all culminate into the Avengers movies. But one of the things that you had that I thought was just absolutely amazing is the fact of there's subtle little things that even in between the standalone films where they're referencing events that happen in another film.
Yeah,
and that's intense planning.
Oh yeah, especially when you look at Guardians being the big, because that's kind of I don't want to say they're almost kind of like the condiments to the meat and potatoes or the meat and cheese of the main Avengers. You look at Thor, Iron Man, and the Hulk, and everybody like Captain America. They're the heavy meat of that Marvel universe. But you put the Guardians in there, they give all that stuff even more flavor. It makes you kind of appreciate it, bring certain things out that you couldn't just have. It was just them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then this is what they needed to do with Star Wars. So what do you guys think? Once again, who do you think should do it? Should it be Pablo? Should it be Filoni? Should it be both? Should it be somebody else that maybe we haven't thought of? Let us know in the comments below. All right, what do we got next?
Well, next we have From a Certain Point of View.
All right.
That's our feature topic. This is where we get to our own meat of the matter, shall we say. Use my own analogy again.
There you go, the meat and potatoes of our show.
Yes. So this week we're talking about trilogies, the Trilogy War. Do we even need another trilogy in Star Wars?
Well, it's interesting because I touched on this a little bit last week.
Yep.
Where I don't really think we do need more trilogies. I'm not saying let's outlaw all trilogies, from here on out. I'm just saying that I don't think that we need one right away, because even though I think we're actually going to get one, I think it would serve the Star Wars, not just the fandom, but I think just the whole storytelling. If you actually did a collection of just standalone films, I think that's the easiest way to widen the universe. What I would do, if I were appointed suddenly the head of Lucasfilm, after, I was done crying in the fetal position. And then, of course, when I saw how much I was getting paid, I'd be pretty happy. So after I was done, yeah, exactly.
Tears of joy.
Yeah. After I was crying tears of joy, and I just went out and, bought a bunch of stuff, right? The next thing that I would do is I would use a bunch of standalone films to kind of seed out the universe. So you have a bunch of different things, right? And then You could approach this either creatively or financially. You could either see which one of these storylines is more successful and is resonating with the fans, i.e. box office, or you could just figure out like which ones you need to expound more upon, like in a creative sense. Then you can start making trilogies off of that.
That's good.
But see, the problem is that if I start another trilogy now, and let's just say you have the movie even coming out every year, that means you're only, once you start a trilogy, you're stuck on this story arc now. So you have to stay within the confines of that story arc. Well, now you know it's going to be at least another, probably 4 years now until I could change the story arc. Whereas in that same 3-year period, I can put out even 2 movies a year if I wanted to. But let's just stick with one. I could put out a movie this year, a movie next year, and a movie the year after. They take place in completely different, time periods maybe, or completely different areas of the universe or whatever it is. And now you've expanded the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, I think for me, what I would do, I think you could do trilogies. I just think there has to be a point and a reason for it. So, for example, if you're going to cover the Old Republic, you cannot do that in one movie. You have to make that a trilogy, in my opinion.
Well, I'll go a step further. I almost think you have to do it in a Disney Plus series.
But I'm just saying, like, at least a trilogy. I should say that, at least a trilogy. I think, though, if you want to focus on something like Bloodline, you can make it a political thriller. If you want to make that, or just something to that effect, okay, that's going to be a standalone film because it just strengthens, it kind of just shows you the politics of the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, I get it because it's already established. I mean, basically what you're saying is like, okay, if you have some, like the Old Republic's an entire time period we've never even explored, yeah, obviously that has to be done in a trilogy, whereas like certain storylines in a universe that we already know, like say maybe something that happens in the Mandalorian area, you could do that in a movie. You could do any of the novels probably in a movie. Right.
And I think that a lot of things, so I think we need to definitely get away from we're in a space now where we can break free from somebody's got to be related to that person.
Yes,
we got to get away from that because what that's going to do is it's going to make Star Wars predictable. It makes it too. I think it wears on you after a while.
It's quite frankly, it's totally incestual because it means that you can't ever break free from anything.
Yeah, because now everybody's gonna be thinking, I wonder who they're related to, and then now
it's like a soap opera.
Yeah, exactly, and it's just like on and on. Here this go again. So it doesn't allow you to really keep things fresh. So I think that you can do something where, okay, now you got brand new characters. You're creating almost a new realm, almost like if you want to do just like we always talk about the unknown regions. Okay, that could be a whole new like sector almost, where it's like, okay, this takes place on this other side of the galaxy.
Well, then what I would do, using that or your Old Republic example, is I would say, okay, fine, let's do a trilogy. And then you can make a bunch of standalone movies within that universe because you've used the trilogy to establish the universe, establish the characters. Then you can seed off of that. But see, my point is I wouldn't do that right away. I would seed out with a bunch of individual movies first.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely start off with a bunch of individuals. I wouldn't say start off with a trilogy.
I mean, you're right. Something as lofty, even if you started with the Old Republic, you would almost have to make that a trilogy. Yeah. So you couldn't do that. But you could maybe make some standalones in familiar areas of the universe, but maybe they're like with The Mandalorian. I mean, look, the Mandalorians visited Tatooine before. Totally familiar. Even went to the same cantina as we do. But the point is that it's with completely new characters. It's familiar, but it's new.
Yeah.
And I think individual movies could explore that further. Things that are familiar, but they're still new.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is if you're going to do something like that, and to your point of like seeding out. So what I would do is I would seed out with a bunch of different other things with the promise of like, okay, look, we're going to give you the Old Republic trilogy. It's coming 2024. That's when the first Old Republic movie is scheduled to come out. But into that time, we got these, let's say, movies, these CD movies that's going to come out first, which gives you your writers time to really perfect that trilogy. So when that trilogy comes out, it's really like,
yeah,
boom, like, okay, this is
exactly. And then you just have different teams. So maybe you have somebody, that's making some standalone films, but you give the person doing this first trilogy like 3 years to come out with their first movie or whatever, and really perfect it, like you said. Another thing you could do is you could actually, if there's, let's just say the Old Republic, you can create a season on Disney Plus and then come out with a theatrical movie on it. It would almost be like, say, after the first season of Game of Thrones, they came out with a Game of Thrones film. And then, of course, you can then go with season 2, and then after season 2, you have another movie, and so forth. So it's like every season of the show then spins off a movie on it.
That would be sweet.
You could do stuff like that.
Because then it's like you can, especially with man, that's actually a really, really good idea, because I'm thinking like, so for example, if we took not the original trilogy, but the sequel trilogy. So, okay, we got Force Awakens that comes out. Okay. Now we're trying to figure out, okay, well, who the heck is Snoke? Blah, blah, blah. Flesh that out in the TV series. Let's say a season.
You could do the flip side of that too. Things that start out in a movie, now you could spin off a whole TV series that explains it rather than a book.
Yeah, and then that way but then the only problem with that is that now you're taking those actors and actresses, you know what I'm saying? Because if you're going to do it, then you got to have that continuity. Almost. Well,
that's why I was saying originally do the series and then the film comes out based on the series versus the series being based on the film. Because if I have a bunch of actors that are committed to, say, 10 episodes a season for 4 seasons, well, they're committed to this. So if I wanted to shoot a movie with them in between the seasons or whatever, or even a little during, or, however they would want to do it, it would make sense because they're already committed to the thing. So if you have a season and then you make a movie, because another thing I wouldn't mind seeing, even though the Clone Wars film was like a disaster, I would love to see more animated Star Wars movies, like theatrical animated series. Because I think they could explore a lot in that.
True.
And I mean, look at the success of all your Pixar films, and stuff like that. It's like, well, why not do a Star Wars version of that? Not like a kid type of thing, but
yeah.
Like, what was that one that came out? I think they actually ended up showing the Phantom Menace trailer. It was one of those things that people went and saw the trailer for the Phantom Menace and then left. It's some space something. It was but it was
back in 99.
Yeah, it was like this thing, or maybe it was like Titan AE or something, or it was something like that. But it was like a full blown animated movie. But it was a real movie. It wasn't like some kids thing.
Oh, okay.
They could do something like that. I'd like to see something like that.
Cool.
All right, but what about you guys? Do you think we should just stop with all the trilogies and just do some standalone movies, or does one of our ideas appeal to you? Or hey, maybe you guys have something different in mind. Definitely let us know in the comment section. You can also let us know at Head to Head SW on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe. All right. I think it's time for my favorite segment, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All right, well.
Take a deep breath.
Yep, take a deep breath. It is time to clear your mind. That's right. This is where we answer your questions that you submit to us Who's our first question from?
All right. Our first question comes from Paul Matthews, and his question is, with Leia and Han both dead, what do you think will become of Chewie?
Well, that's a good question.
I don't know. I think Chewie is probably either going to go back to Kashyyyk somewhere.
Well, he did sort of have a family that he was bailing on from Solo.
Yeah.
So there is the argument that the life debt is now over, so he can go back to Kashyyyk. And actually, the aftermath, particularly the second book of that series, which is called Life Debt, really goes heavily into Chewbacca's family. And, it's almost like a sensible version of the Star Wars holiday special where it talks about his family. They spend time with his family. There's a lot of different elements to it. I would make a strong argument that he would do that. He could go on with Finn or Poe, or maybe stay in not the rebellion, but the Resistance.
Yeah, I think he might stick around just because, he might stick around and hang out with Rey.
With Rey, yeah.
Or I think because he's kind of built that bond with her.
Sure.
So, because even when Han says, like, well, Chewie likes you too, so it's kind of like.
Or maybe he dumps his wife and marries Maz.
Yeah, Maz was a bit touchy-feely at the end of Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, and she always called him her boyfriend. So, I mean, maybe there's something there.
Never mind, forget it.
Hey, it's kind of like what L3 says about Lando.
Yeah.
It works.
Oh, man.
Still the creepiest thing in Star Wars to me, but whatever.
So, yeah, I think it's going to move on to the next question.
All right. Who's our next question from?
I want to think about this now. All right. So, Darian Holbrook asked, JJ said that at the end of Rise of Skywalker, we would see the end of the Jedi and the Sith. With Rey defeating Palpatine, doesn't that make her a Jedi? And it does, because she destroyed a Sith Lord.
Well, yes, but... And
it was point of view.
Well, kind of. I mean, so you did have all the Jedi saying, hey, we're basically with you more or less, to paraphrase. It's kind of like all our power is given to you, rise up and kill this dude. And she does.
Mm-hmm.
So the Sith are technically destroyed, because if Kylo never really was technically a Sith, but he was kind of a... like a pseudo Sith.
He was like a Asajj Ventress, basically.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And he basically functioned as one, even if he didn't actually carry the name of a Sith and he didn't take on Darth whatever. Still. But I do think, honestly, that from a certain point of view, I think that she may have actually destroyed the whole thing, because she doesn't really talk about being a Jedi. She buries the lightsabers. Mm-hmm. She creates her own, which, of course... It's
part of the Jedi trials.
Yeah. And, a big shout out to Dave Kazi, who wrote to us and commented on our lightsaber thing about, what it means. And he basically saw there was Guardians and all that. And, it actually... It worked out, and it was basically what we had all thought, and everything. But she never really goes into her being a Jedi, and I like that. It's open-ended. We don't know. I mean, it feels like she would continue on, but maybe she changes the whole thing, because what's a Jedi at this point?
Well, I think she's going to essentially, like, redo it, but like almost like I have a feeling if the story were to continue in like an episode 10 or something like that, I think she would have a different she probably have some similarities to the old Republic Jedi, in a sense of like trying to keep peace, and because that's what she's always been about. But I think that she is a Jedi because, one, she killed a Sith Lord. Two, she built her own lightsaber, which she didn't have to do when you already had two working ones. And then three, she took on the name of Skywalker. And it's like, well, that's what the whole Skywalker family is about. They're all Jedi. Luke, Anakin, and Leia were both all of them were Jedi. So
yeah. Well, no, it's certainly a compelling argument. I mean, it's hard to say because again, we're going by that interview that JJ did, but you know, JJ's famous for his misdirection. So
true, and it's called the Rise of Skywalker. It's like the rising of what? Like, yes, there's another Skywalker name. Yes,
well, but it makes you wonder though, because you remember there was that one rumor that was talking about how the Skywalker were like a new classification. Like you have Jedis, but now you have Skywalkers, kind of a thing. I mean, I took it to mean she was just honoring the name,
right?
But you could take it like that.
So now you got Sith and Skywalkers now. I mean,
well, not even Sith, right? 'Cause you destroyed Palpatine.
I'm just saying, like Sith was like a race and a religion, but it's kind of like you kind of take.
Yeah, I mean, you know, look, stranger things have happened.
Yeah,
I mean, unfortunately, that question can only be answered by JJ himself as far as his intent. Mm-hmm. But quite honestly, even if he answers it, a future filmmaker can completely overturn it.
True.
You know, somebody could just come out with a movie and, oh, look, there's 1 million Jedi again. I mean, it really, again, this is why there needs to be planning, because I can't help but think that this is why we have all these questions.
All right.
Because a lot of things weren't really made very clear to us.
Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely agree with you 100% on that one.
All right. Well, keep sending your questions in to us, guys, because we love to answer them. And, of course, you can send them in at head-to-head-SW on Facebook and Twitter. You can even send the question in on Instagram at head-to-head-SW with a really cool little picture that maybe we'll even use on this screen. And then, of course, leave your comments in the comment section below. We'd love to know what you guys thought of this week's episode. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell to find out when all of our videos are coming out. And that's going to wrap it up for our show this week, I think, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys next week. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at head-to-head-SW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at head-to-head-swpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.